Gamers of Reddit from the 90s or earlier, what are some of the issues in games back then that younger gamers would never understand? Trying to click on the one pixel you needed to click on in LucasArts games. Hidden portions of games that no one is able to tell you about, via internet that is. My favorite game is Luna 2 Eternal Blue. My sister and I spent hundreds of hours beating it only to get a lackluster ending. Credits roll and we're depressed for about 10 minutes, then it suddenly plays a cutscene and returns control to you. It's an epilogue with 40 plus hours of more gameplay, bonus dungeons, harder bosses, and an amazing true ending to the game. If developers did this today, it'd be spoiled in about 5 hours. Nowadays games get spoiled weeks before they're even released. To make sure you were playing a legit copy, they would ask you to do things like make you enter the fourth word from page 8 of the user manual. If you lost any of the original packaging you were pretty screwed. Or check your age by asking questions only an adult would know, like in Leisure Suit Larry. No save games or checkpoints, often very infrequent multi-digit codes that would require you to replay huge swathes of the game to get where you were at. Related, quarter-eating mentality even in console games. Limited lives that once used up, required you to restart the game completely from the very beginning, often loaded with cheap deaths to ensure that happened regularly. Mom, don't pick up the phone, me trying to play Doom over dial-up with my friend. Or the opposite while in the middle of a game. Get off the internet, I need to make a call. Or when I needed to make a call and my parents were online and I just started mashing buttons until I heard the infamous goodbye from the other room. Having to check to make sure your hardware was compatible with the game. Differences in video cards, RAM, and sound cards could mean the game you just bought would not work on your computer at all. The heft of the CRT you had to pack up to get to the LAN party. LAN parties in general feel like something I missed out on as a console peasant. Waiting for the tape drive to finish loading. My Game Boy wasn't backlit. Anybody who had one of those knew how much of a pain it was. However, it didn't matter much because the games were just so good. Your younger sibling saving their game on your slot, erasing everything you've accomplished so far, and insert disc number 3. Seducing the NES to actually play a game is pretty high up there, making it all the way to the last boss only to get your butt kicked, lose your last life and have to go back to the first level. Frick you Ninja Gaiden, knowing that one kid, we'll refer to him as the Oracle, who knew all the secrets and how to beat all the bosses, screwing around with a Game Genie and hoping the code you entered didn't break the game. Seducing the NES made me laugh because it's so accurate. I remember we had a game that we figured out could get running every time if you put a big heavy book on top of the NES. Fixed camera angles. I'm replaying Ocarina of Time and it frustrates me how often the camera helpfully swings around on its own. Having to play the game in one sitting because you haven't bought a memory card yet. You couldn't simply look up ways to beat games on the internet. Scratched CDs. Disc Doctor makes your disc look like someone sneezed on it, but it worked. I was just at the tail end of the 90s gaming, before internet guides were well established. Back in the day, guidebooks were such a godsend. You don't realize how often you look up how to do something in a game until you don't have internet. If you were the friend that had the official strategy guide, you were the coolest kid on the block. You'd take that crap to school and show off to your friends. Read it together. Look at the tips for beating certain bosses. People would take notes to bring home. Oh, also, the era prior to the internet, gaming myths were so much more prevalent. Rumors would spread about games that could never be confirmed or denied. People would come up with wildly difficult tasks to be able to unlock wildly awesome things. A famous example is there being a Mew hidden under a truck in the original Pokemon Red and Blue games. One of the things that I noticed when trying to play an old childhood game on an emulator is that some of the games tied the game speed actions to the processor speed. This wasn't a big deal when processor speeds were in a range from 16 MHz to 100 MHz, but when you try to play it now, things move so fast that you're dead in less than a second. Also, the manuals back then were huge. It was fun just to read through them about how the game worked and the history behind the events depicted in the game. Another thing was DRM was handled by codes scattered throughout the manual. Carmen Sandiego would ask you to look up the population of a certain city in the almanac that was included. A tank game I had would ask for a radio security clearance code. If you messed it up, the game would quit. Man, I tried playing Wing Commander again recently and thought I was going crazy because the game was so much faster and therefore much harder. I thought I was a god as a kid for being able to keep up with the blistering pace. Turns out I just had a crap PC then. Stealing batteries from remotes. This remote goes through batteries pretty quick. Dad probably. Those old games were brutal as frick. The TV trope Nintendo hard exists for a reason. And because there were no saves, when you died you'd have to start over from the very beginning. Becoming good at these games was less about innate skill and more about training muscle memory because you had to replay it so many times. Freaking screen watchers. It's a legitimate strategy. Being excited to go rent a game that just came out. Hearing your friends rave about how great it is all week at school. Mum finally takes you on the weekly Friday night blockbuster run. You run to the section, and you freeze as there are only 30 empty display boxes. You recheck, hoping you were wrong. Then you run to the front counter, praying to see a copy in the stack of returned VHS. Mum sure as heck isn't driving you to another blockbuster when there are plenty of games for you here. And we go Fridays not Mondays. So you see that the shelves and pick up one of the 40 copies of option B that you rented last week. You play the game all week, hating it because it is not the one you wanted. You even grip the controller angrily. Second Friday rolls around. You run to the shelf and they're out again. Soul crushed. You accept you won't get to play it till most of the school is on to the next game. Pokemon Stadium 2. I got to own a copy in 2010, after freaking 9 years of renting that crap in Blockbuster until that store disappeared. Logging out of Windows 95 to free resources so you could play Heretic on MS-DOS. A game so difficult you literally can't finish it, you meaning an individual, not the player base as a whole, or parents walking past the TV, snagging the controller cable by accident and pulling the console off of the shelf. Happened to my PS2 more times than I can count and it somehow survived. I doubt a modern console could survive that. Running into invisible walls. Ridiculously long loading times for games that can now run on your electric toothbrush. Games crashing because the cartridge was a bit loose. 99 games in one CD. The feeling of ripping apart the outer plastic cover of tech magazines giving away demo CDs. Replacing batteries for your Game Boy. Multiple CDs or floppy disks for one game. 20,000 word masters PhD level text only notepad format walkthroughs instead of YouTube videos. No DLC. No microtransactions. No skins. You buy the whole game and that's it. GammaFAQs. GammaFAQs. I remember printing off 100+ page walkthroughs for RPGs on the school printers. No bug fixes. Deal with them son. I remember having super long passwords for some games. Super Tennis or SNES comes to mind. The format was literally JSTK8XD3HRFTLWJPC2GNYBQ14065C6PDJSTK8XD3 hours FTL6WNLZJP. It took forever to write down and all the progress was lost if you messed up one character. One time when I was 4 or 5 I was just spamming passwords in Kid Icarus and then suddenly one of them worked and I was on the final level with all of the power-ups. I ran upstairs all excited to tell my brother. That games only worked on channel 3. Before every computer and console had an online connection, the idea of patching a video game didn't really exist. Whatever was on the cartridge disc was what you got. The final product. It was a mixed bag. On one hand, some games would ship with game-breaking glitches that you were just stuck with. I remember early copies of the original Kingdom Hearts had a rare glitch where Saba just wouldn't appear on Tarzan's level, effectively making it impossible to advance on that save file. Nowadays such a glitch can be patched pretty quickly to remove the issue. It's a minor inconvenience, but back in the day it could completely ruin your experience. On the other hand, the ability to patch games after launch means publishers don't do nearly as much QA upfront. It's okay to ship games with bugs because they can always fix them later. That leads to disasters like the FO76 launch where the game is borderline unplayable day 1. Shigeru Miyamoto of Nintendo fame once said a delayed game is eventually good, a bad game is bad forever. That isn't necessarily true anymore, but the attitude drove a very positive design philosophy that is sort of lacking in most big companies these days. I remember when patches on games were exciting stuff. Warcraft 2's stupid exorcism bug was so irritating. Some games used the CPU for timing. When CPUs got faster, the game suddenly sped up to the point of being unplayable. So you had to hit the turbo button on your machine to make your 286 or 386 run like a 4.77 MHz 8088 computer. Sound card drivers just never worked. Figuring out what video settings you could use for a game. Will this work with my EGA monitor? Will the game work if I want to use my new SVGA monitor? Having to restart your computer after editing the config size file to not load all the drivers you didn't need so you could have enough free memory to run SimCity 2000. Then remembering to change the config size file back when you were done. Figuring out which things could be loaded into high memory, that is, over the first 1 MB of RAM, so you could have enough base memory available for your game. IRQ interrupt conflicts with your controllers. God, those sucked so bad. Games that make you say, where the frick do I go? Get lost in a level, miss a key, or a passage somewhere. I think a couple levels from GoldenEye were like this, maybe Turok 2. Games nowadays have objective markers or better level design to funnel you where you need to go. Guides and friends were essential to beating some of those games. Game won't load? Just give the cartridge a quick blow of air, then open up the slot the cartridge goes in and blow some air in there too just to make sure there's no dust. Worked every time. I used to headbutt my cartridges to make them work. I convinced myself I had a magic forehead. Getting 3 serial ports to work properly. You need the printer, the mouse and the sound card to work. Printer on port 1, mouse on port 2 and sound card on port 3. Port 1 and 3 share the same interrupt. You need to flip dip switches or move jumpers on port 3 to change the base address to get it to work with port 1. This is a seriously small issue, but one that bothered me a lot as a kid. I hated the fact in Pokemon Blue and Red, you couldn't run. You had to walk everywhere and sometimes it took an ungodly amount of time to get from A to B. It was a game changer in Ruby and Sapphire. You've still got the bike though. Needing multiple discs to install a game on your PC. Horrendous camera problems. This one is hard to explain because it's an issue that basically doesn't exist anymore. Sure, there may be some games with some degree of camera problems, but it's not nearly as painful or prevalent as it was in the days of early 3D games. Namely, you had no control of a camera whatsoever. Now some games got around this by forcing a fixed camera perspective. Crash Bandicoot, or the gameplay was designed so that camera control wasn't necessary. Resident Evil, Final Fantasy, but in the case of many early 3D adventure games, you just had to hope the camera would do what you needed it to. Two games that come to mind are Castlevania 64 and Jax, Enter the Gecko. In the former, the problem of jumping down a hole only for the camera to literally get stuck on a floor 50 yards above where your character is was infuriating, and there was nothing you could do about it but hope it reorients itself. Couple this with horrendous checkpoint systems, limited lives, or no checkpoint at all, meant a lot of situations broke down like this. Welp, the camera is stuck on the floor in a different level of the building again and I can't see my character. Let me just move around a bit to unstick the camera and oh, I was standing on a tiny butt platform I couldn't see, so I fell off and died instantly. Time to go back 10 minutes and try this again. You have been visited by the paparazzi dog. Comment the perfect framing so that a paparazzi never pursues you. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.